I mean, for weeks now, if not more, there have been a lot of discussions in Israel about carrying out a large-scale operation against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and there was a flurry of diplomatic activities to try and prevent that, to give the Lebanese state a chance to fulfill the agreement that ended the confrontation between Hezbollah and Israel. And for a while, it seemed that those efforts were working. But all the time, Israel understood that if it were to launch strikes to start a war with Iran, engagement with Hezbollah was really a very real and credible possibility. And when the cabinet started its meeting overnight, there were talks in right-wing media circles, in people from reporters close to Benjamin Netanyahu, that the cabinet was already considering expanding the war to another front. Everybody understood that to be possibly Lebanon. With Hezbollah launching those drones and the missiles, basically Israel got what it wanted, and it immediately announced that it was going to teach Hezbollah a lesson. We heard from the Israeli Minister of Defense saying that Israel is going to launch a wide-scale offensive, that nobody was immune, not even the group's Secretary General. 𝗍𝗶𝗲 𝗧𝗏, who was a defense minister at some point, also a right-wing figure, but from the opposition, said that Israel must seize this opportunity and Hezbollah once and for all. There was a meeting between the head of the opposition, Yair Lapid, and the Israeli Prime Minister earlier in the day. That man, Yair Lapid, expressed absolute support to the Prime Minister in the war with Iran, but also with Hezbollah.
And Noor O'Day, thank you very much. This conflict was initiated 2.5 days ago by two countries, Israel and the United States. We just got the latest from Israel and the region here across the Middle East and the Gulf. Let's go to the White House. 𝗙𝗶𝗲 is here. Kimberly, outside of two recorded video messages by Donald Trump, there's been very little public communication, and yet he has thrown the U.S. into what appears, and what he even says, is another major war in the Middle East. What's going on?
Well, the U.S. president was, as he arrived back in the United States, as he arrived back in Washington from Florida, had little to say to reporters, which is notable. This is recognition by the U.S. president that this is quickly escalating, and that he is trying to control the narrative around the fact that we have seen oil and gas prices spiking, that the flow of energy in the Strait of Hormuz has been disrupted, and his European allies and Asian allies are reacting. And this is the concern for the U.S. president, that there is now going to be a long-term oil crisis that could potentially see the price of oil spiking above $100 a barrel. So this is a big problem for the U.S. president. Not only is there a concern of a global economic crisis, but he was a president that not only was elected to end foreign entanglements for the United States, which obviously isn't happening, but also to get control of the economy, to bring prices down. This is going to do just the opposite of that. This could see inflation spike. It could spike the transportation costs in the United States and really affect economic output around the world. Now, already we know from polling data, Cyril, that only 27% of Americans support Donald Trump's decision to take military action against Iran. The fact that this could now affect not only the U.S. economy, but the global economy, could drive public support and allied support down even further.
𝗙𝗶𝗲 reporting from the White House. Thank you, Kimberly. Now, we told you at the top of the show that Qatar, which sits on the world's largest reserve of natural gas, is suspending its liquefied natural gas production. This is major. We also told you at the top of the show that Iran was now targeting energy infrastructure really across the region. It's not just Qatar, it's also Saudi Arabia. A tanker was hit in Oman. 𝗬𝗂 is looking at the global impact of this potential energy disruption from Brussels. Brief us on what we can expect at this very early stage, now that we know, 𝗬𝗂, that Iran has expanded its list of targets and it is now going after energy.
Well, this is the most significant impact that you will feel on the global stage because Qatar Energy supplies about 20 to 25% of the globe's energy. This attack on the 𝗧𝗶𝗸 facility, this is the world's largest LNG terminal. Qatar Energy not just provides the LNG, but it also operates a fleet of roughly about 170 ships and container ships, which are going to be expanded to 200 by 2030. By expansion plans that Qatar Energy has in the North Fields would make it one of the biggest players. It's one of the top 3 players anyway. So this is going to have a knock-on impact on everything energy related. And liquefied natural gas, you have to understand, is not the natural gas that you use, but it is essentially a very important component of the global gas supply. It provides electricity, it is used in production, it runs power plants, and a lot of it is exported to all over the world, including Europe, here where I am. So it is a significant blow to the global energy supplies. It is not just Qatar Gas though. The largest oil refinery in Saudi Arabia has also stopped as of this morning. It is no longer refining oil. So this is certainly getting a lot bigger than people anticipated or expected. The chokeholds that Iran and the Yemenis have on the 2 major 𝗶𝗶𝗏 and Strait of Hormuz.
Osama, can I jump in here? I want to just inform you, Osama, that you said chokeholds. We're showing the map right now because viewers need to understand the geography of this, right? 20% of the world's energy goes through the Strait of Hormuz, which is the tiniest waterway that you see there in the center of your map, and it's in between Oman and Iran. And Osama, please, that is great. Keep walking us through this, but I wanted to show the map because we can see on screen left for our viewers, you see Qatar, there's Bahrain, there's Saudi Arabia, there's the UAE, there's Iran itself, by the way. All of these major oil suppliers, and all of that, or most of that energy to get to the rest of the world needs to go through that tiny little choke point, which is about 30 to 40 kilometers wide, which appears to be closed. And Osama, hence your point about the rest of the world will feel this.
Well, 30 kilometers is the width of that channel that you see, that tiny little channel. It becomes, for shipping lanes, even tighter. And Iran controls the north and Omanis control the south, where tankers have come under attack. The tankers have come attack in the port of 𝗬𝗏𝗟. There's been tankers who've come under attack in the waters of Bahrain. And now this, so essentially what you're seeing is a major disruption. So far, this is the first working day of the week after the markets opened. The global oil markets are hovering just around $80 a barrel, which was expected, is lower than expected. But again, if shock waves like this are going to be inserted into the system, this is going to have a knock-on effect on everything from production, from electricity, from the cost of various goods supplies, even marine traffic. So everything on a global scale is now going to feel an impact. And this is something that the Iranians had been warning all along. Iran itself is the 3rd largest producer in the OPEC countries. It produces about 4% of the global oil supplies, and even on its offshore oil production plants and facilities, there have been a number of explosions that have been reported this morning as well. So this is going to have wider ramifications for global energy markets. And there's going to be a serious rethink about where the world stands. There's already a call for the Europeans to do an assessment of where their oil reserves are. The Chinese obviously are going to be the first ones affected by this, but this is not just going to be limited to these countries. Even in the United States, you're going to have an impact on energy prices.
Osama, thank you very much. Let's go back to 𝗧𝗶𝗏, who is in the Qatari capital. Zain, I think after territorial integrity and the safety of their populations, for Gulf countries, their energy, their source of energy and ability to export it out to the rest of the world is really the most precious thing that they have. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. It's been the case for over a century, if not longer. And their entire identity, their economy, every bit of development that's happened is tied to their ability to export their energy. Even these modern cities that have become safe havens from regional conflicts, whether there was war in India and Pakistan, or in Lebanon, in Iran, in Iraq, anywhere in the region, even in Somalia or on the African continent, wherever there was instability, the Gulf countries, whether it's the capitals of Saudi or Qatar, whether it's Dubai or the other crucial states in the UAE, whether it's Oman, all of them represented a kind of silo. They were oases of calm and commerce and productivity and progress, and a safe haven for people to come to make business. And so all of that is now under attack. And what we've seen is these countries, along with the United States, though their participation in a joint statement is kind of dubious, considering it is the U.S. and Israel that began this conflict. It does matter who started it. They did attack Iran first. They've issued a joint statement in which they have said that the actions that Iran is taking, albeit in retaliation, is a dangerous escalation that violates the sovereignty of multiple states and threatens that regional stability that the region has come to rely on, but that the global economy has come to rely on for so long. They go on to say that targeting civilians and non-belligerent states is reckless behavior that undermines stability, and that we stand united in defense of our citizens, our sovereignty, and our territories. The statement of the Gulf countries and the U.S. go on to say, we reaffirm our right to self-defense in the face of these attacks, and we underscore our commitment to regional security, and we commend the effective cooperation in the field of air and missile defense that prevent greater loss of life and destruction. So they're striking a tone of unity, but they are also talking in a capacity that seems to illustrate they are willing to take more defensive action going forward.
Zain, thank you very much. We're joined now by 𝗏𝗏 𝗧𝗶𝗸, assistant professor at Kuwait University. And sir, you're joining us from Kuwait City. It's great to have you on the program. So Iran had said that if a war began, they would consider all U.S. bases across the region legitimate targets. Within 48 hours of this conflict beginning, they changed the rules of engagement, and they are going after civilian targets across really the board in all of their neighbors, whether it's the UAE, whether it's Qatar, whether it's Saudi Arabia, and they are going after energy. Your analysis?
Iran is fighting a war of existence. It's an existential war for them, and I think that's why you see them going after different targets around them. This is a long-term issue that we've been having with our neighbors in Iran. We've been trying to find a way to coexist peacefully. This has been an issue since the beginnings of the Islamic Republic, and we've managed, sometimes with difficult responses and answers from their end, but we managed with all the meddling in the internal affairs of Gulf states, with the proxy activities, with some of the wars that happened at the time. But this cannot continue forever. And I think we've reached a point in which they're raising the ante to unprecedented levels. This brings the question of what next? And I think the Gulf states need to be clear-eyed on their defenses, and they need to be very clear on this being a broaching of sovereignty. This is no longer, as you said, about U.S. bases. And even the argument about U.S. bases is flawed. These are bases that are in, sovereign countries across the Gulf. So the question here is, how can we develop a strategy that does not put us into the same position as Iran and Israel and the U.S.? Because that's
this is so interesting. This is so interesting. What do you mean by that? You've said two things. You've said that the Gulf states need to be clear-eyed about their defenses. First of all, what do you mean by that? Do you mean that they need to adopt a more offensive posture in what is now a regional war? That's number one. And then what do you mean by Gulf states need to figure out a strategy that doesn't lump them with Israel?
Because they are separate from Israel and the U.S. This is not their war. And I think what the effort has been, and Iran and Israel here are both joining, unfortunately, in the same goal of trying to push the Gulf states away from Iran into the hands of Israel and the U.S. and fighting their war. We are trying to mediate in our best, and I think we need to develop a thin line or a distinctive line in which we're going after, as I said, our own defense mechanisms. Does that mean going on the offensive? I think all options should be on the table, because we cannot sustain this whole interception for a while. This is going to be unprecedented and dangerous for our economies, for our maritime security, for our sovereignty in general. So there needs to be clear solutions out of this. Now, mind you, diplomacy...
Would you allow me to jump in, because I do think this is such a key point. You appear to be advocating for Gulf states to mark out their own position in this, which is a with their own political identity. And yet both Iran and I think you could argue the U.S. and Israel have actually set circumstances that create a binary choice for Gulf states, where if you're not with one side, you're with the other. Is that fair?
That has been on display not only during the past few days in the war, Cyril, but across the past few months and years. And we've been successful in trying to manage ourselves with both Iran on the one hand and the US and Israel on the other. And I think that needs to continue. But that should not continue without us marking our own independent route. And this is a long-term security issue, right? It's not a day or two. And it will take very difficult decisions on how do we deal with our partnerships, security partnerships, with the US, be it, or with other partners. How do we develop our own independence and pushing things through? I think these are very important questions that need to be handled accordingly.
Yeah, Badr, I have one more question for you, but I want to explain to our viewers what they're seeing on their screen, which is that earlier today we saw several U.S. Air Force jets be downed, and it wasn't clear there for a while what had happened. Iran claims that they downed at least one jet with their missiles, so they essentially claimed a tactical military success against at least one plane. And then CENTCOM, the U.S. Central Command, said that actually there was friendly fire whereby Kuwait's air defenses had mistakenly shot down the U.S. jet, and the pilots, the crew, were all able to self-eject, and they're now in hospital and they're said to be okay. So that's what we're seeing on our screens. One more for you that is very tailored to where you are. What happened at the U.S. Embassy, do you know? Because there was smoke seen rising from the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait, and they said the message from the embassy was don't approach the building.
Look, we've been, like the other Gulf states and Jordan, we've been under attack from Iran for some time now. And they've been going at different facilities, and the reports that we've heard, and I'm not privy to which version of this narrative is the more accurate one, because things are very fluid as we speak, but that they are attempting attacks and there has been interceptions, and hence you hear all the sirens off and the bombings and the interceptions and so on.
What do you think needs to happen now?
Diplomacy. I never give up on diplomacy. I think, and for those that were betting on a long-term war, which has been one of the options, I invite them to go back and check the conflicting U.S. statements. President Trump is open to everything at this stage. I mean,
the Iranians have said that they're not going to engage while they're being hit by the U.S. and even Qatar, which has carved out a role for itself as one of several key regional mediators, has said currently we're being targeted by Iran. We're not engaging with them right now. So diplomacy seems to have ground to a total halt.
We've been through this last June. This is more grave, no doubt, but I think there will be turnarounds into finding a solution to this. And it's not going to be an easy solution. That's why diplomacy has failed us twice before, because all the parties to the negotiation were not fully committed. And here I'm signaling the US, probably with some pressure from Israel. But I think we all need to have our heads back onto the table, and we need to produce something that is more lasting and that is clear for everyone involved in the region and beyond.
Okay, so I asked you what you think needs to happen now. That's an expression of intent. But what do you think is a plausible scenario? What do you think will happen now?
Look, as I said, all options are on the table. Are we going to see some more escalation before some calm? Possible. Are we going to see some breakthroughs? I mean, even those reports that you mentioned about Larijani not wanting to discuss with the US, you can find other alternatives that say that they will be willing to discuss things with them. I think everything is on the table. Iranians are trying to pressure the US into stopping this by going after various targets that could go back home into the US. I mean, look at what happened today in their attempt to attack the oil installations in Saudi Arabia last time. That would increase, if that has been successful, which it has not, but if it has and others would, it would increase the oil prices and already we have a 13% increase over the weekend. So the more that happens, that would push for a quicker settlement. I think everything is on the table. The missing point and the missing part here is, what is the US endgame? No one knows, because we have a whole list of menu items that range from regime change and collapse to nuclear and missile containment. So I think the Americans need to decide what they want to go for. and be clear-eyed, because we know what the Iranians are standing for.
What do you think they can go for? What do you think that the U.S. and Israel can reasonably hope to achieve in this war? Because you have Israel on the one hand saying, look, this will last as long as it lasts, whatever the cost. That's what the military and the government were saying just a few hours ago. And then the other country that jointly launched this, initiated this war, which is the U.S. As you said, Donald Trump put everything on the table in his recorded video message when he announced the beginning of the war, and it's unclear what would constitute for him a victory that would allow him to put an end to it. So what do you think they can actually achieve? Regardless of what they want, what do you think they can do?
But see, that's key, because that's the opening. We know that the interests are not aligned between the US and Israel. They went into this with two different objectives. The Israeli objective has been, the same all along. The US one has been wish-washing. We haven't seen a very firm response on how they want to see dealing with Iran. Do they want a new regime? Do they want an isolated regime? Do they want one that they can work with and move on? And I think the latter. I don't think the Trump administration really cares what happens in Iran, as long as it doesn't pose a threat to its interests. It comes to that. For Israel, that's not the case. And I think we can live with the US version. I don't think moving into the regime change business will do us any good. We've tried it many times in the region and it failed.
Badr Al-Saif, assistant professor at Kuwait University. Thank you very much for your time, and thanks for your analysis today. If you are just joining us, here is a reminder of the latest developments in the joint Israeli-US attacks on Iran. Qatar's state-owned petrol company has ceased all production of liquefied natural gas products. Qatar Energy is blaming military attacks on its facilities in Ras Laffan and Mesaid. The country shares the world's largest natural gas reservoir with Iran. In the past few hours, Iran has launched strikes on several U.S. allies in the region. That includes Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain. Saudi oil company Aramco says one of its facilities has been hit in a strike. The Ras Tanura refinery has been shut as a precautionary measure. It is one of the biggest plants in the world, producing more than 500 million barrels of crude a day. In Kuwait, the U.S. says several of its fighter jets were mistakenly shot down by Kuwaiti air defenses. All pilots safely ejected and are now in stable condition. The U.S. Central Command says the cause is under investigation. The port city of Ras Al Khaimah in the United Arab Emirates has also come under attack. An explosion and plumes of smoke can be seen near residential buildings. Meanwhile, Iran has told the International Atomic Energy Agency that Israel and the U.S. attacked its nuclear facilities on Sunday. However, IAEA chief 𝗓𝗏 says that there is currently no indication that any of the sites have been hit. He has warned attacks risk causing radiation releases, which could impact countries beyond the borders of Iran. Grossi also saying that the agency is still trying to contact Iranian nuclear authorities without response. The UN nuclear watchdog is holding an emergency meeting at the request of Russia.
We stand by what I said before. We haven't seen major military activity targeting the nuclear facilities. We have been looking at different satellite images. There might be something there, but not significant or comparable in any way to what we saw last time.
Well, we are live across the region and beyond. Bernard Smith is in Vienna. Charlie Angela is outside Westminster in London. Kimberly Halkett is at the White House. Dmitry Medvedenko is in the Russian capital, Moscow, and there's been more reaction from the Kremlin on the conflict, so we'll get him on that. First, though, we'll get the latest from Tehran. Mohammed Val is in the Iranian capital. Mohammed, tell us the latest, and two specific things I'm looking for is what are Israelis and Americans targeting today in Iran, and what damage have they done? And within that, I'm wondering, given that Iran has targeted energy facilities across Gulf countries, have Iran's energy facilities been targeted?
Well, Cyril, in the last minute, two loud explosions have been heard here where we stand, and one more right now as I speak to the eastern side of Tehran. So there is no let-up in this campaign of bombardment by Israel and the United States against Iran, particularly here in Tehran, but also many other cities have been targeted, including Karaj in the west, Arak city, Nahrawand and Hamadan earlier in the night, also Ahwaz, Bushehr, Kharaj, Sanandaj, all these cities have been targeted with bombing overnight and today. There is no let-up, as I said, in that. The Israelis have made it sure or clear that they are going to widen the campaign, also the Americans, and that is visible now across Iran. At the same time, Iran has announced its 11th wave of what is called Operation True Promise 4, and that includes a supersonic ballistic missile, 𝗧𝗶𝗸, that has been used for the first time in this campaign, as they announced, and it was launched against Tel Aviv. Other types of missiles have also been announced, and it is within that framework of what Iran is calling the widening and strengthening and stepping up of its campaign, and showing the enemy, as I say, that Iran has more and more capabilities to use in this conflict.
And Mohammed Val, thank you very much. Bernard Smith now is in Vienna. Bernard, you were covering a little earlier today a meeting at the IAEA, that's the International Atomic Energy Agency, so they monitor everything that is nuclear. They've always played a central role in the conflict with Iran. They met earlier today. The chief was speaking, 𝗓𝗏. What did he say? What did you learn from that? Okay, Bernard, hold on. We can't hear you, unfortunately. Audio. We'll come back to you in a second, Dimitri. We'll get that fixed and come back to you for what came out of the IAEA meeting. Al Jazeera's Dmitry Medvedenko, as we told you a moment ago, is in the Russian capital, Moscow. Dmitry, what is Russia's position on this? Because they have been an ally of Iran. They have assistance and weaponry from Iran in their war against Ukraine. So what's their posture now that Iran is being attacked?
Well, Iran is Russia's strategic partner, not a military alliance like Russia has with North Korea. So Russia does not have the obligation to come to Iran's rescue militarily, but it's doing so diplomatically. And Russia's been calling for coming back to diplomacy and stopping hostilities. Now, what's important in the rhetoric that's coming from the Kremlin, they're still calling this an unprovoked attack by the US and Israel on Iran, while many countries right now in their diplomacy have switched to condemning Iran for strikes across the Gulf. Russia is trying to maintain kind of a diplomatic balance, saying that Vladimir Putin has spoken to many leaders in the Gulf, specifically to Mohammed bin Zayed in the UAE, the president of the UAE. No surprise there. Russia has around 50,000 tourists right now in the UAE. Just this alone is enough, but also the UAE is an important partner of Moscow. They're helping with diplomacy, helping with hosting talks on resolving the Ukraine issue. Now, the main message has been that Russia expresses regret and concern the fact that diplomacy was underway between the United States and Iran when the US carried out with Israel this attack on Iran. Now, Russia's saying it's drawing its own conclusions, and it's a segue into the topic of Ukraine, where the US is, of course, an important mediator. And Russia's saying right now that it still welcomes the US as a mediator in its participation, but trusts only itself and will continue defending its own interests, and its position on Ukraine is not changing.
Dimitri, thank you very much. Charlie Angela now is in London, outside the Chambers of Parliament in Westminster, also not far from 10 Downing Street, where, of course, the Prime Minister sits. Charlie, the UK changing its position. A few days ago, they had said in the run-up and in the lead-up to this war that they weren't going to allow their bases to be used by the US for this war. That has changed?
Well, the UK has been stressing the fact that it is not at war with Iran. But just let me tell you what's happened in the last couple of hours. 2 British warplanes have intercepted Iranian drones that were targeting a British airbase in Cyprus. And that follows an earlier attack when an unmanned drone hit that base, hit the runway there. It did cause minimal damage and no casualties, but it has put the entire base and parts of the island on high alert. And you're right that on Sunday, the Prime Minister confirmed that the UK will now let the US use its military bases for specific limited defensive purposes. very, very narrow scope, specifically launching attacks against Iranian missile depots and Iranian missile launchers, no more. And that is a major shift, because previously the UK had said the US would not be allowed to use those bases. Now, we understand that that base in Cyprus is not on the list. What's been mentioned is RAF Fairford. That's a base that lies about 70 miles from here in London, and 𝗬𝗂𝗧𝗶𝗫 in the Indian Ocean. But the Prime Minister has been keen to stress that the UK was not involved in those initial attacks on Iran, and it will not be joining any offensive actions now. And what we're expecting to hear later on today is some very tough questions for the Prime Minister in Parliament, as ministers want direct assurances that those bases being used by the US will not be used for anything more than limited defensive purposes.
Charlie, there are an estimated 300,000 British citizens in this part of the world, in the Middle East. Are UK authorities now considering evacuation?
Yes, there are plans underway. We heard from the Foreign Secretary, 𝗧𝗶𝗫 earlier today, talking about coordinating support teams, bringing in the travel industry, but also looking at a government-led evacuation plan. That 300,000 number includes expats, it includes holidaymakers, and also people who have been stranded there. Now, we understand that one of the possibilities they're looking at is renegotiating the reopening of regional airspace. Another one is looking at busing Britons into Saudi Arabia and then flying them out from there to the UK. This is going to be an enormous logistical operation. To confirm, there is no evacuation yet, but planning is absolutely underway.
Charlie, Angela in London, thank you very much. Let's find out what the Americans might or might not be doing for their citizens in the region. Kimberly, you're at the White House. You just heard the reporting out of London. The British authorities are now considering, what would be a massive evacuation of all their nationals who are in this part of the world. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. Have the Americans so far considered anything even remotely similar?
If they have, it has not yet been made public, but there certainly have been, over the course of the last 48 to 72 hours, there have been extensive updates from the U.S. Embassy directed by the State Department in order to ensure that non-essential government personnel at various embassies were made available to evacuate. We also know that their family members, and then just generally American citizens who are looking to leave countries in the Middle East, were helped and assisted in terms of making those arrangements. But what I can tell you is that we will be getting the latest updates on all of that in the next hour, when we are expecting to hear a briefing from Pentagon officials. Not only will it be the chair of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Kane, but also the Defense Secretary at the Department of War, as it's now called, 𝗬𝗫𝗀𝗃𝗃. Now, there's no question, Cyril, that the reporters who are participating in that are likely to question the motives of the U.S. president deciding to take military action against Iran, given the fact that the Defense Department's own intelligence agency has been on record saying that there was no imminent threat to Americans from Iran. That is one of the questions that will have to be confronted, but also that is fueling pushback from lawmakers on Capitol Hill. As a result, we know that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, will be briefing members of Congress on Tuesday about the end game and details about, with regard to Operation Epic Fury. But today, Monday, the U.S. Secretary of State will also be briefing the top leadership in the U.S. Congress, because there is a growing effort among a majority of Democrats and some Republicans to limit the president's power through war powers resolutions that are likely to be debated and voted on in the coming days.
Kimberly Halkett at the White House. So you've told us, and we're putting that on our radar and on our viewers' radar, that there's going to be a press conference. We will carry that live. That will be from the Pentagon. I see the camera feed is up, and that'll be 𝗬𝗃𝗃𝗃, the Secretary of Defense, along with General Kane. Thank you very much, Kimberly. Now, the U.S. Central Command is saying that it has destroyed the headquarters of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, stating that it has, quote, cut the head of the snake. But Iran's military structure is often described as being highly layered and complex, and that complexity is deliberate. The nation operates parallel armies, multiple intelligence services, and several command structures, all ultimately answering to the supreme leader. Al Jazeera's Ali Hashim explains how Iran's military and security institutions operate and why they are structured as they are.
Iran does not rely on a single military chain of command. Its security system is layered, duplicated, and intentional. At the top sits the supreme leader, the commander-in-chief of all armed forces. Below that authority are two parallel militaries. The Artesh, Iran's regular army, is responsible for territorial defense, borders, space, and conventional warfare. Alongside it, there's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, known as the IRGC, and its role goes beyond defense. Given its ideological structure, it's responsible for protecting the revolution, politically and militarily. Within the IRGC, the aerospace force controls Iran's missile and drone arsenal. This forms the backbone of Iran's deterrence strategy against Israel and the United States. Iran avoids merging these forces by design. Duplication here is a safeguard against coups, internal threats, and sudden collapse. Inside the IRGC sits the 𝗬𝗎, a mass mobilization force used for internal security, crisis response, and ideological enforcement. Iran also maintains parallel intelligence services, while the two main branches remain the Ministry of Intelligence that follows the government and the IRGC intelligence unit. There are around 16 services that operate under the Council for Intelligence Coordination. Beyond its borders, Iran projects influence through its specialized force. The IRGC's Quds Force manages Iran's regional networks, including in Lebanon, Palestine, Yemen, and Iraq, previously Syria. It operates with tactical flexibility, but within limits set in Tehran. Military command is organized through separate entities known as Maqar. The 𝗧𝗶𝗸 unit coordinates joint military operations during wartime and national emergencies, while the Muhammad Rasulullah bloc is responsible for defending Tehran and managing internal emergencies. Both the IRGC and the army maintain their own joint staffs. They coordinate. Above the battlefield sits the political security layer, the Supreme National Security Council, which brings together senior military commanders, intelligence chiefs, and political leaders to align national security policy. It coordinates strategy, but it does not replace military command. This system may appear complicated and fragmented, but this is done on purpose, and it's central to how Iran manages power. Even after the killing of senior IRGC commanders and joint staff figures, transitions have been orderly. Iran's military structure is built to absorb shock, but it's not clear yet whether it can adapt to faster and more complex changes. Ali Hashim, Al Jazeera.
All right, let's unpack these developments further. Hassan Ahmadian joins us. He's an associate professor at the University of Tehran. He joins us from the Iranian capital this hour, and joining me on set is Al Jazeera correspondent 𝗬𝗶𝗶. Rasul, always good to have you here. You were in Iran only a short while ago. You've covered this region extensively. Let's start with you. The Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei having been assassinated, who is currently running Iran? Who is calling the shots?
Well, according to the Constitution now, a commission a council yesterday has been formed, which is called the Interim Leadership Council. And it consists of the president of the country, so Mr. 𝗬𝗂, the head of the judiciary, 𝗬𝗂, and also another one on behalf of the Guardian Council, 𝗬𝗓𝗏. So now these are three guys that are, according to the Constitution, members of the Interim Leadership Council, and they are in charge of running the state affairs. And indeed, to a certain extent, they are doing that. But on the other hand, so there is a war, it's wartime. And
that was my question, because there are major decisions that Iranian leaders have to make, military or civilian leaders.
Absolutely. So an IRGC is having
the
its
Revolutionary
own
Guard
autonomy, the Revolutionary Guard. So in Iran, we have two armies, and one of them is the regular army, and it's a quite loose one. But the Revolutionary Guard are specifically have been built to protect the revolution, and they are loyal to the revolution, and they are indoctrinated, ideologically motivated, special Iranian special forces in a sense, and they control the whole strategic weapons, conventional weapons, and they're extremely powerful when it comes to the economy as well. 1/3 of the country indeed is under their control, and they're influential over the political appointments, and even to a certain extent, perhaps they're going to be extremely determinant on who is going to be the next leader of the country. So officially, and IRGC is also responding to the war, and they're making their own decisions. But on the other hand, there is a third power center as well, which is the Secretary
Rasul,
of the
just a second.
Defense Council.
I'm being told, sorry to interrupt, but I'm being told that we have new footage out of Tehran. Let's see what it looks like. I understand that the Iranian capital has been hit. We just got the pictures. There it is. This is live. Several explosions have been heard in the Iranian capital. These were filmed just a short while ago. And that's what it sounded. Explosions in the west and southwest of the capital. Okay.
Indeed. And then there is a third power center. It is the Secretary of the Supreme Defense Council, Ali Larijani, who was very much close to the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, and he was supported by his office. He's a key figure in running particularly the security policy. But also Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf, the spokesperson of the parliament, who is closer to the IRGC and has been quite a central figure in Iranian establishment. So we're seeing the three power centers, the Interim Leadership Council, the IRGC, and Larijani and Kalibaf. So the political side, the constitutional side, and the military side.
Hassan Ahmadian, you're in Tehran. What do you want to add on your end on who's calling the shots? Because at the end of the day, Rasul did a great job of explaining there are multiple power centers. But at the end of the day right now, there is a group of people, which I expect is a small group of people, but correct me if I'm wrong, a group of people that is making decisions that will commit Iran in this war to, a certain future, right? And there's a group of people that are deciding what to target, who to target, and how to conduct this war.
I think basically it's the Supreme National Security Council that is calling the main shots at this point. All what Rasul has described, all the power centers have representatives there. The figure that is heading that is Mr. Ali Larijani, as Rasul explained. He is in a very central position at this point. Of course, the interim council of leadership will have a final say over what the National Security Council decides, but strategic decisions traditionally have been made and formed within that Supreme National Security Council and then brought to the leadership before this, the Supreme Leader, now the leadership, to ratify it. And I think that institutionalized mechanism is very much intact despite the initial attack that assassinated many commanders and the Supreme Leader.
Hassan Ahmadian from Tehran, Rasul 𝗧𝗶𝗫 joining us in the studio this hour. Thank you very much to both of you. It is now 13 GMT. I'm 𝗧𝗏 and you're watching Al Jazeera's coverage of the conflict between Israel, the US, and Iran, which now threatens global energy supplies. For the first time, Iran is expanding its targets to include oil and gas facilities in the Gulf region. Iranian drones have been intercepted at a major Saudi oil refinery and a Qatari energy facility. There's also been an oil tanker hit in the Gulf of Oman, killing at least one person there. Kuwait, the UAE, and Bahrain are also reporting Iranian drone and missile attacks. Qatar's state-owned petroleum company has ceased all production of liquefied natural gas products. Qatar Energy says that is due to attacks targeting its facilities in Ras Laffan and in Mesaid. The country shares the world's largest natural gas reservoir with Iran. Saudi Arabia has shut its biggest domestic oil refinery as a precaution. Saudi Arabia's defense ministry saying that 2 drones tried to strike Aramco's Ras Tanura facility, but those 2 drones, they say, were intercepted. This is one of the biggest plants in the world, producing more than 500,000 barrels of oil a day. In Iran, the Red Crescent says at least 555 people have been killed in 3 days of joint U.S.-Israeli strikes. The Israeli military says it has begun a new wave of attacks in the heart of Tehran. More than 130 cities and towns across the country have come under fire. The United States military says that 4 American personnel have died in Iranian attacks since the U.S. and Israel began striking on Iran on Saturday. And we'll be hearing from the U.S. Secretary of Defense, 𝗬𝗍𝗄, live in just the next few minutes. So we will carry that live on Al Jazeera. In Kuwait, the defense ministry says 3 U.S. warplanes have crashed and the crews are safe. U.S. Central Command says Kuwaiti air defenses mistakenly shot down its jets, adding that the cause is under investigation. We go live now to 𝗧𝗶𝗸 in Doha. Zayn, the day has been full of major developments, but I do think the one piece of news that we might remember today, by the time the day is over, is that Qatar has stopped, or at least suspending, producing what is its main resource and main export and what it's famous for, liquefied natural gas.
That is correct, and this is likely to have major knock-on effects in the region and broadly in the global energy markets. Now, liquid natural gas is the lifeblood of the Qatari economy. It is the lifeblood of this country. It is